Namo Buddhaya, Namo Dhammaya, Namo Sanghaya, Namo Namah. Om Ahom. So yeah, on a course like this that's quite short, trying to be quite selective about the input. What would be helpful for you to know? What would make a difference practically in terms of you being aware, or what would help give you the key elements, if you like. And so we're going to look at a key element this evening. Yeah, you'll know why it's key when I tell you what it is. But first of all, I just want to spend a few minutes recapping on last week, or just sort of refreshing your memory. And then I've got a question I'll ask. So last week we were looking, well, I initially talked about objects or things that are difficult to be aware of. I asked the question, what is it that you find difficult to be aware of? And there were a number of really good answers. And we focused last week on one of those things that can be quite difficult, and that's what are called afflictive emotions, or sort of mind states that create suffering. They lead to suffering in the mind. They cause us suffering, and if they cause us suffering, then it's quite likely that we then cause others suffering. Something like anger would cause us suffering, but if we act out anger, it causes others suffering. So I talked a bit about craving and aversion in particular, different manifestations of craving and aversion, how they show up in the body and the mind, and what happens when we're aware, when we can be aware of those mind states, and how the tendency often is to turn away, to sort of not really want to be aware of more difficult things. And if those difficult things, difficult to be aware of, are pleasant, then we tend to get overly involved in them. We tend to relish them and want more of them. And in that way, when craving is strongly in the mind, then we're more likely to act on it. So I talked again about this idea of looking at how we're relating to what is happening. So if you like, we're not just making objects of things out there, the cars, the dogs, the objects that we're seeing or hearing. We're making objects of mental states, mental things. So craving, we can be aware of craving, as something that's happening in the mind, or aware of aversion. Oh, this is what aversion feels like. This is what it's like. So we pay less attention or put less emphasis on the person that we're annoyed with, or the idea that we don't like, or the fact that we have a broken computer, whatever it is, and we pay more attention as to what that experience is like, what that experience of feeling aversion or irritation at the broken computer. So less emphasis on broken computer, more emphasis in here on what's happening. So that was the context for last week. And then I asked you in the breakout rooms, I suggested you might think about if you had particular favorites in terms of manifestations of craving, wanting, desiring, or not wanting, pushing away, being irritated by or disappointed by. If you had favorites, and I heard that at least one group quite enjoyed doing that, which is good. That's the purpose of it, is you bring some interest and some humor to those habits. We don't have to take them so seriously. We take seriously that we don't want to act on them and that we don't want to suppress them. But in terms of staying with them, we need to be quite light with that. We need to be quite sort of light and interested about what's happening. So the question I'm interested in hearing back from you, just there won't be much time for lots of people, but just how did you find exploring that exploration of craving and aversion during the week, informal practice or perhaps informally? Informally, we're much more likely to interact with other people. And so sometimes, or interact with our computer, whether it's broken or not, and so that can be when we experience craving and aversion more strongly. So just what did you notice? What were you curious about, or how was it? Just how was it to be aware of some manifestation of craving or aversion? So we've just got a few minutes if a few of you would like to share something of what you noticed.
For me, I experienced it as quite a relief not to focus on the content of an emotion, and that on zich, it felt as if that the emotions or the feelings became lighter, because there was like a sort of barrier or a stop, not going into the content, but just staying with the experience. So it made it instant lighter for me. So that was good advice.
Great. So it lessened the suffering.
Actually, it did.
Yeah. So when we get very involved in the content, it does. I'm not sure if I used this image with this group, but of putting fuel on the fire. We put more gasoline on the fire, and so that's great. Thank you. Thanks for saying that. Good. David.
Yeah, I loved the sitting with aversion this week. Usually as a kid, would have that, I don't want to go to school attitude, and then, kind of, oh, listen, come on, you have to, and kind of pushing that. And I kind of just sat with it, and that would have, a lot of my life would have been, yeah, come on, just grit and bear it. And I actually thought, no, what happens if I just sit with this even longer? And I felt like a cross dropping off my back. And it was like, yeah, my life could actually be easier. Aversion, sometimes I would think, if you're aversion to something, there's something needs to be fixed. You need to face this. But in some ways, I think it's almost like maybe you could let up a different energy, that maybe there's a different way to face it, to change the conditions. And it's not so much about getting up the strength to face your current, to-do list. It's actually almost surrendering maybe to a different way of having a totally different to-do list that might totally different way of living. So that's just been something that's playing out, but it's great. It feels like a weight off.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I really loved that you said you just enjoyed sitting with aversion, or I'm not sure if enjoyed was the word you used, but it was something like that. It was like, yeah, great. In a way, that's how it's very helpful if it can be like that. We don't bring aversion to that experience of aversion. It's just like, oh, here you are. What are you like? So great. Thank you. Okay, maybe someone.
I still have one.
Yeah.
Yes. So
Great.
I really noticed a really big difference between doing these meditations before or after dinner. So when I was doing them before dinner, the effect of craving was, well, yeah, it was physical. It was really there. It was really strong, and it was sometimes hard to actually go beyond the feeling of craving for food. And after dinner, there was much more drowsiness. So sometimes it was really I had to focus really on the drowsiness and on the moha as such. Like, okay, and then it would kind of disappear, and then I would feel that there's actually something underneath it. So often there were tendencies towards either craving or aversion, like feeling some pain in, I don't know, sitting down in my legs, and I just wanted to stop this, or I want to get up, and before dinner I would not really feel this. There would be much more hunger as such.
So interesting, and in a way sometimes we can have craving, but we can also have, actually there are these sensations, there are these hunger sensations that that can be experienced.
Exactly.
I think one of the ways it can get very interesting, if you notice particular thoughts that might be feeding the, it's before supper, I only had a small lunch or something, so I'm, you can notice thoughts, and they could be feeding that craving. They could be feeding the in a short time I'm going to have my food, I'm going to be satisfied, so all of that can be very, very interesting just to notice. Great, thank you. Good. So we started talking there with Joris about thoughts, and that's good, because that's what I want to look at this week. I want to, it's another object. It's difficult in the sense that it doesn't necessarily directly cause pain or suffering, but it's quite a subtle thing to be aware of, quite a subtle mental object. Sometimes it can feel a bit difficult to be with it, because thoughts are very close to our sense of who we are. They're there so much of the time as well. They're so present, but they do contribute to or this sense of who I am. Hard to separate me from my thoughts. And I talked, I think in the second week maybe, when something is sort of tightly bound, when we tightly hold it, then when something is important to us, we make this nest of it. But when something's tightly held and important, that's often what we do. We try and protect our sense of me, our sense of self. And then we find it hard to see as an object, find it hard to see objectively. So we are important to ourselves. I mean, that's natural. And so therefore we will try and protect that sense of self, protect the nest, if you like, not let keep those other sort of predators out of our nest. And the various emotions we're talking about last week, but also thoughts we're going to talk about this week, if you like, they intertwine, and they help create this nest of self, this sense of self. One thought after another, one thought connecting with an emotion, a body sensation, a feeling, all sort of combining to create this sense of who I am. So the Buddha had a really lovely image for this. His wasn't so much a nest as a house, in terms of how we construct this sense of self, and how it's happening all the time. So he talked in the Dhammapada about house building, and He says, so I'll just read you a little bit about it. He says, many a birth have I undergone in this process of faring on in the rounds of conditioned existence, seeking the builder of the house and not finding them. Painful is such repeated birth. House builder, this was after his enlightenment. House builder, now you are seen. Never again shall you build me a house. Your rafters are all broken, your ridge pole shattered. The conditioned mind too has gone to destruction. One has attained to the cessation of craving. So that's the Buddha seeing through the different ways that thoughts and emotions are always creating this sense of self that confines us. That as in a way, there's nothing wrong with a sense of self when we see it in awareness. But if it's not seen, that it limits and confines us to a great degree. So the third poison, which I might have just briefly mentioned, I did mention in response to a question last week. So moha, delusion. If you like, this is part of the mechanism that allows the house to be built, if you like, the self-construction that goes on. So moha, meaning delusion or ignorance. Ignorance in the sense of, often in the sense of ignoring what's happening, ignoring what's in front of us if we look carefully. So there's a couple of ways in which moha works, in which delusion or ignorance works. I'll just mention them briefly before we look at thinking. So we can protect the things that we find important, if you like, by not looking at them too closely. So focusing more on our ideas and interpretations about the experience rather than the direct experience. So we talked about this before. So we're looking in a slightly different direction. We're not looking at the direct experience, but over here a bit at the ideas, ignoring the evidence of our own senses. So the antidote to this is mindfulness, where we are aiming to look more directly at our actual sense experience. But another way moha operates is to create smoke screens, which also mean that we can't see clearly. So it throws up things that obscure the nature of reality, the nature of how things are. And it can throw up things like sleepiness, confusion, or dullness, or apathy. Lots of these states that are basically obscuring or colouring a bit cloud-like in a way that we can't see very clearly. But if we know that we can recognize those states too as objects, then it becomes very helpful, and we get a little bit of a handle on delusion. There you are. There's this sort of fogginess in the mind, or dullness in the mind, vagueness in the mind. So sometimes, I don't know if it translates well, but I have what I call a rosy coloured glow in the mind. So this can be when actually it's quite pleasant, and that's part of it. It's a bit of a delusive type state, but it's coloured with, it feels quite pleasant. Maybe it's on the edge of sleepiness. And so because it feels quite nice, there's less motivation. There's less motivation to look really clearly, and the motivation is more, or the inclination is more to wallow a little bit, to enjoy it. So one of the ways that helps wisdom or helps right view is to become more aware of delusion, more aware of moha. So let's just talk a little bit about thinking and how we can work with thoughts in the mind. So thoughts are that, if you like, that thinking about that secondary reality, or the building blocks of construction through our thoughts and our ideas. And language is so embedded in our world, in our consciousness. It's quite hard in some ways to see how much revolves around thinking, reading, writing, talking, various sort of images, if you like. These are externalized thoughts, but yeah, we're taking them in all the time. How much reading we do just to navigate our ordinary world. One of the things that really struck me when I, for a while, I was watching The Handmaid's Tale, which some of you may be familiar with. And the women are extremely oppressed, and not one of the things that the ruling religious class do is that they don't allow women to read. And so when they go into shops, these handmaids have to do the shopping, and there's pictures of everything. It's quite funny. It's like looking at a kid's picture book. It's like taking that language away, but it made me realize how much, when you go shopping just to buy something, language is involved, thinking is involved. Public transport, street signs, and they all feed the mind. It's taking in of words, of language. Keep it from moments of silence. So I'm not saying that language isn't important, thinking isn't important. We couldn't live without it, and it makes us do incredibly creative things, as well as just navigate our way around the world in ways that are essential. But it's a particular mode of mind. When I was talking about mind a couple of weeks ago, I said it had all these different functions and capacities, and it does. But thinking is the one that we allow to dominate far more than any other function or capacity, which is not very restful for the mind. It can be very tiring to think a lot. So we're looking with mindfulness to just help get a bit more balance into the mind, and allow the mode of awareness, being with experience, a little bit more space to get a bit stronger in the mind. So while it does dominate, thinking is a completely natural function of the mind. And if you like, it's the job of thoughts to think. And thoughts in themselves are ethically neutral. They're undetermined mental events. So we can think in different ways. We can think with the poisons, with afflictive emotions, if you like. That can be motivating our thoughts, or we can think with wisdom and skillful qualities of mind influencing our thoughts. But the thoughts in themselves are neutral. So we can, when we think, for example, when we think with wisdom, when we think skillfully, we can think how do I work in practice? What's helpful here? What's needed in this moment? How do I help awareness become stronger in this moment? So there's a sense of being able to assess intelligently, not intelligence in the sense of being very clever or very knowledgeable, but knowing enough to, in a way, it's the opposite of moha. It's the opposite of the mind going to sleep a bit or becoming quite dull. It's just the mind is awake and it's interested, and then it's able to remember what it knows about the practice and put into place what might be helpful. So that helpful thing might be as simple as, what's my intention? Remembering my intention in the practice. It's to be aware. Or perhaps you're doing the Metta Bhavana practice. So, it's to, keeping clear in your mind what you're doing, or remembering that intention. Or if you find yourself going to sleep in practice, okay, what would be helpful? And in this particular practice, we're always looking for the first thing that we do is to look to be a bit more aware, to bring mindfulness to the object, mindfulness to sleepiness. We might have realized that actually we were trying to get away from sleepiness. Actually, we can remember it's okay, we can just be aware of it. You find that that's not doing very much, then you can assess it again and think, okay, what might I do now? Maybe I'll just open my eyes. I'll just open my eyes for a bit. So it's like that wisdom, that wisdom quality in the mind is able to think about what is best for a conversation, for any situation, inside or outside of formal practice. So in relation to thoughts, the job of mindfulness is to recognize thoughts as they're happening. So to recognize thoughts or thinking as an object in experience. If we can simply know or be aware of thoughts as they happen, we're much less likely to get lost in the content, lost in the story. But this can take quite a bit of practice. So you might find that you want to go between being aware of the mind, being aware of thoughts, and then maybe sort of grounding in your body or the physical senses in order to, and then open up to the mind again. So if you like, you build up stamina of being able to open to the mind. John Kabat-Zinn, I think it is, he says, sometimes there are a trickle of thoughts in the mind, and sometimes a cascade. So trickle, just in case the English isn't clear, so trickle is just quite lovely. It's just quite sort of small, quite delicate amount of, and so it's a watery image. And then a cascade is something like a waterfall. You might have a whole cascade of thoughts, a lot of thoughts. And we're saying it doesn't matter which it is. It doesn't matter if there's a cascade or a trickle of thoughts in the mind. The job of awareness is just to notice. So it's not the job of mindfulness to try and stop thoughts, to stop thinking. Not anybody's job. They're just there. We're watching the mind in its natural state, just watching thoughts as they arise. becoming aware that you're thinking in the present moment. If you notice that you've been that you've been sort of lost in thoughts, and in that moment of noticing that you've been lost, you're not lost. You're actually awake and aware in the moment. So sometimes we talk about going back. We realize that we've been caught or distracted, or the mind has wandered, whichever way we talk about it. And then we talk about going back to something, the breath or the body. And in this practice, it's not really necessary to go back, because in that moment of noticing, you are already aware. And that's as much as we're trying to do. So what are you aware of in that moment? That's the job of mindfulness right then. Yeah, so I'm going to introduce a couple of, actually I'm going to probably introduce mainly one way I want to talk about of working with thinking, and then we'll meditate, and in the meditation we'll work in this way, and then I'll carry on to explore thoughts in a slightly different way. So the way that I want to talk about is often talked about as labeling. So labeling the type of thoughts that we're having. So this is very helpful in terms of not getting so caught up, not getting lost. We're starting to look at the thoughts in a more objective way. So we will be aware of the content. Of course we will. But being aware with labeling helps us not follow the content, get caught up in it. So it's a bit like the counting in the mindfulness of breathing. It's a soft mental label. So you might notice thoughts where the mind is planning, it's or anticipating, which are both activities that are future oriented. You might notice the mind that's remembering. So it's more past oriented, or various sort of memories in the mind, various images in the mind, memories. So the label would be something like planning, anticipating, imagining, fantasizing. If you find that you're getting quite caught up in a story about your next holiday or your next meal or whatever it is, fantasizing mind can be very helpful, because fantasies are very seductive, aren't they? They're pleasant to think about, and there can be quite a strong desire to just carry on thinking. But the label cuts through that a little bit. Repeating, apparently something like about 75% of our thoughts we've already thought before, and some of our thoughts we think multiple times. And I often use the example of if I'm maybe slightly anxious about a journey I have to take, and then I might find myself thinking over the detail where my ticket is, not to forget my phone, because credit card, whatever, lots of things. And then I might think about, I've only got a certain amount of time between changing from this station to the next train, and so many things in a journey, just a tiny bit of anxiety in the mind. And that sort of rehearsing mind can be very strong. If you're giving a talk, you might notice that. Maybe there's frequent sort of imaginings of yourself standing where you're going to be standing or sitting, and who your audience might be, and Yeah, we can spend a lot of time with repeating thoughts, very, very similar thoughts in the mind, again and again. So judging and comparing, we've already talked about a fair bit, but again, very helpful. We can have judgmental thoughts, or judging thoughts, or thoughts that compare, and just notice those. Just put a nice little label around them. Wanting, not wanting. You might notice that the thoughts that how craving is thinking, or aversion is thinking in that moment. You can label wanting or not wanting, craving or aversion. So we've got sometimes we have thoughts that just seem so important that it's hard to let them go, especially if they seem feel like we've solved some sort of problem through this particular thought. Maybe it's something you've been thinking about for a while, and you find a solution in the middle of your meditation, or you have a thought that just feels like a really spiritually important thought. So I labeled those ones the big one. This is the big thought. It's too important not to think about, and that's a little bit of a sign, actually, that we're caught in it. If we feel like that this is too important, we've made a big nest out of that thought. And we've probably actually had quite a few thoughts to have got to that point. We've probably had quite a few. So it may feel really, really important, and sometimes you can just jot something down if you want to help let it go. But really, it's just a thought. So it can be quite good practice to notice in a way that they're quite compulsive, those sorts of thoughts. There's a lot of self-involvement or self-investment often in those type of thoughts. So one type of thoughts that you won't find on many lists is what I call appalling thoughts. So when I did the retreat at Metta Vihara, this needed a bit of translation. So it's possible that it's not clear, but it's really thoughts that when we get shocked by our own mind, when the mind throws up thoughts that are a bit small-minded or a bit petty, or they're not who we want to. They're not the sort of thoughts that we want to be having. I'm not that sort of person who has those thoughts. So sometimes, just for a bit of humor, I'll say that's an appalling thought. Appalling is sort of terrible, but it's quite an old-fashioned sort of word. So you might have to find your own word in your own language for the thoughts that you can just take a bit more lightly, because God, it's a terrible thought. How can I think like that? But it just helps you not take yourself quite so seriously, which is always helpful. So there's all these labels, and I'll remind you of them during the meditation. It's not necessary to do labeling for very long. It can just be really useful when you start to look at thoughts. But if you feel like the mind is quite familiar with different sort of categories, then you can just label thinking. Just recognize that thinking is happening in the mind. Someone I met on retreat, it's a camping retreat, a Buddhafield month-long retreat a few years ago, and she had a teacher. I think he wasn't a Buddhist, and he said to her something very interesting. He said, "Don't touch your thoughts," and then he said, "I mean it. Don't touch your thoughts." And he was pointing to just notice, in a way, just try and break that habit of getting really involved, putting your hands all over your thoughts, just giving them a good hug. It's like, just let them go, just let them be as they are. Know the story, know the content, but it's not necessarily to get involved with it. So don't touch your thoughts. Yeah, and then last thing to finish with is U Pandita, who's one of the 2 Burmese teachers that I've talked about. This is the one who was a bit like, was a very fierce monk. I met him when he was coming up to 80, and he'd been a monk since he was 8 years old. And he says any thought can arise in any mind at any time. Any thought can arise in any mind at any time. And I think this can help us just see the impersonal nature of thinking. Of course, thinking is, our thoughts are conditioned by many factors, but there's a lot of overlap, if you like. We're not unique in our thinking patterns and habits, and we're all influenced by greed, hatred, and delusion, as well as their opposites on our good days. So I think this is helpful. Any thought can arise in any mind at any time. It's helpful in terms of not taking our thoughts so personally. Help us to see the more impersonal nature of thinking, rather than what the thoughts say about me. I think it can also help with that we quite often automatically believe our thoughts, especially if there are these quite strong emotions and views in the mix as well. Yeah, so we might believe, one meditation that we're great, we just had this experience and we identify it with, so there's thoughts about how great that was and how great we are, and then the next one, maybe we go from being great to feeling rubbish, because we had a really. So we don't need to believe those thoughts. And if the less that we believe our thoughts, the less we get swept around. It's not that thoughts are always untrue, they're not. But if we don't examine them, then our assumption is that what we're thinking is what we believe, what we're thinking. But actually, our thoughts are often quite random. You only have to watch your mind actually for quite a small period of time to see they're random, they're speculative, which is an aspect of moha. They're inconsistent, they're biased, and all this we can see when we're aware of thinking. So there's a massive potential in thinking, seeing how that sense of self is constructed. Seeing the biases in the mind. It can be very amusing, actually, as long as we're not taking it personally. It can be amusing. If we're taking it personally, then it's quite painful. So again, there's quite a lot of tenderness and gentleness needed with ourselves, with watching thoughts and reminding ourselves of right view, watching thinking. Not being so involved, it being more impersonal. Okay, so that's what I want to say about thinking. Obviously, there's a lot more. I had lots of thoughts about what I could say, but I haven't got time to say them all. But I would be interested in hearing any thoughts you have, or any comments or clarifications around this. So if you'd like to do that, then feel free to unmute yourself or give a wave, and Dharmasara or myself will catch you.
Well, just a very
Jetske.
very
Yes.
simple one to start with. I don't know the meaning of bias, and
Unbiased.
unbiased. It's unbiased. Can you? I don't know what it means.
It means not taking sides.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Usually we take the side of whatever most sort of fits our view.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know it now. Thanks.
Great. Anyone else?
I would like to ask something.
Yeah.
You were saying that we're going to practice labeling the thoughts, right? But frequently when you label a thought, there's like a emotion attached to it. Like, for instance, you were talking about planning, no? Normally anxiety could be attached to it. So what do you do? And it's only labeling, and what do you do with the emotion after?
You in a way you label what you notice first. So if you notice the thought, there's thinking or planning, and then you may then notice anxiety, and that's fine. You can label that. You can label sadness, anxiety, joy, as you notice them. So I didn't mention those, but it's absolutely
okay.
Fine to also label that. And the label, if you like, is a way of it's a way of not going into the story, but it is a way of feeling it more directly. So with anxiety, that there may also be more to notice. This what's that like? What's that experience like in the body? How's it affecting mind? But thanks for that. That's
thank you.
Good for everyone to know. Anyone else?
I also have a question. I feel like I could have difficulties with labeling my thoughts because I often find it difficult to put things into words. So then I think maybe if I want to label it, I will start thinking about what label should I give to it, which is probably the opposite of what it should what the end result should be, like thinking less, but I think maybe it will make me think more. So what could I do in that case?
It may make you a couple of things. So it's not necessary to, if a label doesn't come fairly easily, then don't worry about it, but recognize that thinking is happening. Recognize thinking's happening in the mind. What was that other thing? But also it's not a problem if you have the feeling that it would be helpful to label that quite accurately, then it's not a problem if you end up in the short term thinking a little bit more. In a way that we want to, we're using the thinking faculty to support mindfulness, to enable a clearer recognition of what's happening. So as I say, in the short term, that may mean a little bit more. Sometimes what I found, and why I say this, is because sometimes I felt like when I get the right label, it really the power of the mind state, or the power of that pattern of thinking, is greatly reduced just from being, it's the naming it is part of seeing it more clearly. So that's why I say it can be really helpful. But experiment with it. If it's not something that is that everybody needs to do. It might be just something you try out this evening, or maybe you try out in the recording during the week a couple of times and just see how it goes. And sometimes it can be enough that I think Sophie's frozen. Never mind. I think it can be enough. I forgot what I was going to say now. Whoops, she's gone.
I think my internet connection.
It did. It froze, and I just commented on that, and then I forgot what I was going to say. So
okay, but I heard most of what you said. I think good. I just missed the ending.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I think that really helps, because then, as I understand it, it's more a tool that can help you, and I can try it out. But if it makes me think way more, then obviously it doesn't really help. But sometimes, I will just try it out.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, great. Good. Okay, let's have a leg stretch for just a couple of minutes, and then I'll lead us into a sit.
I think that Moksha Gandhi has a question. Can you, Moksha Gandhi?
Yeah. Well, it was more a comment, really, that it just feels quite a metaphor in a way to name and to label, just to kind of acknowledge that it's there in a kind of metaphor way, rather than pushing it away or not allowed to think or have a judgment about it. So it just feels, I'm kind of looking for ways to make that work as well, because I'm worried that's going to stay too much up in the head and wanting to drop more down into the body. It does feel like metta could be the approach or something to allow for the moment.
Because you're not like you say, it's easy to want to label, or you use labeling, use recognizing as a trying to get rid of something, trying to make it go away. But it's a bit more like, oh, hello, planning. Hello, anticipating, or hello, sadness. So it has that flavor, it has that recognition in a friendly way, clear knowing. So there was a comment just now, Mika, about sometimes labeling past, present, and future. Yeah, that's another way. We can do it. But in a way that does help. But what we're looking at here is particularly related to content that draws us in. And that can be just helpful to recognize, oh, sometimes we then see patterns. There's a much more of a remembering person than I am a planning person, so actually then well, I think you'd get that from past, present, and future too. Okay, so a couple of minutes to stretch our legs, and then we'll sit. So settle into your posture in your own time, not rushing to get to your cushion or your chair. Just being mindful while you get to your chosen posture. Mindfulness doesn't start at the beginning of a formal sit and end at the end of it. So perhaps starting just with that sense of relaxing opening, settling back. And perhaps initially just resting either with one sphere of experience to help settle. So perhaps resting in the body. Or you might choose to let the awareness be a little bit more open and perhaps body sensations and sounds. And maybe the breath as an object within the body. And if your eyes are open, you can also be aware of seeing when you remember. And be aware too of the quality of mind. The mind might feel quite busy, quite a lot of thinking, quite a lot of mental activity. Or it might feel quite quiet, more restful, or a bit dull and sleepy. So it's not a problem, whichever one it is. You just become aware to have some sort of starting point. This is what is happening. I'm aware of it. And you might choose to set an intention for the practice. It's like pointing a compass, heading in that direction. An intention set in the mind can mean that it's easier to follow. Set the intention to be aware, to remember to be aware. It can be as simple as that. And perhaps checking the quality of awareness. Is there a sense of being present? Of being receptive or open to whatever is happening? A sense of spaciousness. And checking the quality of effort or energy being used. Not too much, not too little. And once you feel reasonably grounded and settled and connected with your physical experience through the body, through the senses, perhaps opening up to just being aware of thinking. Not trying to look for thoughts, just being aware, noticing as they arise. Very gently, again, like looking out of the corner of the mind's eye. Like looking at fish streaking through the sea. And you might try using a soft mental label for different categories of thoughts. We're not doing this to stop thoughts happening, but to know them more clearly without getting lost in the content or the story. So I'll just drop in a few names of different categories just to remind you, but don't feel that you need to try and look for these types of thoughts. Just be with what's actually happening. So there's planning thoughts. Or anticipating. Fantasizing
or imagining. Remembering or memory. And if there are a lot of thoughts, not trying to label each one. You might just recognize thinking. And any particular quality of mood or emotion that might be fueling or driving the thinking. That might be pleasure or anxiety. Notice any judging thoughts. Or the comparing mind. And notice how it feels if you can label those qualities of mind. Simply know them for what they are. Judging judges. Comparing mind compares. That's their job. Nothing personal. Can we recognize them with a quality of mind that's different to judging, comparing? With an openness and spaciousness of awareness. And notice any repeating thoughts. And feel the energy, thought that wants to think itself. Notice when wanting or not wanting are part of the energy driving a thought. Feel them out in the body or the mind. And if you find yourself getting a bit lost in thoughts, caught up in the content of a story, just recognizing that. And then noticing whatever else is present in that moment, the body sensations, the breath sensations, hearing or seeing. And now let go of labeling any thoughts or thinking. Though don't worry if the labels come automatically at times. We're going to explore thinking in a slightly different way. I'll lead through and just feel free to follow as little as or as much as you'd like to. Keeping the awareness soft and spacious, but also with a degree of alertness and attentiveness. You might notice different quality to different thoughts. Some thinking can feel quite loud, quite definite and intentional in the mind. And that can sometimes be because it's accompanied by strong emotion or strong energy. But it might also be if it has a clear view or a clear idea behind it. It might feel a bit more definite than another type of thinking, which can be quite wispy, floating threads of thoughts, loosely connected. All thoughts can feel like a subtle inner narrative that's always going on. If you find that the thought stops suddenly when you try to be aware of it, just settle back and see if you can relax the effort, relax the energy, allowing thoughts to come to you rather than going out looking for them. Not trying to catch them. And not worrying if you miss them. There will be another one, probably quite soon. So, what does a thought feel like in the mind? Asking the question not for an answer, but to encourage that gentle looking. Looking at what's actually happening rather than our ideas about what should be happening. How substantial is a thought? How tangible? How transient? Just knowing a thought as a thought. A thought isn't necessarily just words or images. There can be all sorts of fragments of experience that form that inner language. Different feelings, perceptions. An inner direction or impulse. A sense of knowing. Allowing a thought to fall apart under a soft, curious, attentive, open awareness. So thanks everyone. Have a good week's practice and hope to see as many of you as can make it on Sunday evening, if you're able to come. Yeah, look forward to the two groups coming together and yeah, so you can see each other. Yeah, have a good week.
Joy.
Good night.